Chicago Soul book that's coming out. There were 2 books on Chicago soul music written 20 years before I did mine, and that did not do what I did. These books did not look at the social history. They didn't look at the cultural history. They didn't look at soul music from a jazz background, which I did. And I saw there were tons of books about Detroit, tons of books about Memphis, but there were so few books about Chicago soul, which I was very much into. So I thought, okay, here's something that I'm very emotionally connected to, and as a researcher, writer, scholar, I feel that there is a gap. So even though I'm writing about something historical, because my book takes place between basically 1957 and 1983 with a little afterword about the present time, but my book is basically history, but it was looking at there is a gap that needs to be filled, so I'm going to set out and do what I can to fill the gap with this book.
But when you do that, when you talk about Aretha Franklin, you're not only talking about Aretha Franklin to the people of your generation and to the people who were around, remember her from the 60s. You're also talking to 14, 15, 16-year-old people whose taste is just sort of coming together. And maybe through something you write or something you might do on NPR or on radio relating to Aretha Franklin, some young person who was not familiar with Aretha Franklin will become interested in her, and you will sort of help build an audience for her in the future by what you're writing today about a historical figure.
Yeah, and of course she was still alive when I wrote this, but it was also looking at her from this perspective, historical, cultural. What was her political involvement? And that's the same thing with the Chicago Soul book. What is the political involvement? Because I think these are issues that keep coming up. These young folks here on the panel with me know much more about contemporary artists than I do. But I can bet that there are political dimensions to what are happening today with young artists today.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that I think historical articles are cool, but I think you can do like complex, because the idea for Bad Boy Radio, I got that because I did that as an oral history story. So it was like the oral history of Bad Boy Radio told by the people that were involved in it. I got that idea from, I think it was Complex Magazine, had a story on the oral history of Tommy Hilfiger. Because I think Tommy Hilfiger was like starting to make a comeback, and because all the clothes from the 90s are now coming back. But going off of that trend of, people are now interested in that particular clothing, Complex said, well, let's tell a story about Tommy Hilfiger, what happened to him. And a lot of us didn't know what happened. Tommy Hilfiger was popular, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. And then we all learned it was because apparently people thought he was racist because of what people thought he said on Oprah Winfrey, which apparently he didn't even say. But all that to say is you can take a topic in jazz and do an oral history of whatever that thing is. And at that point, you're tapping into nostalgia of whoever was around when that particular artist or that particular trend was going on. And then you're also bringing in, like you mentioned, a new audience of people who may be interested in it, because now in music, everyone wants to feel like they discovered someone with Spotify and with SoundCloud and everything. We want to feel like I'm the only person that's listening to this one thing, or I'm the person that discovered this old record or whatever it is. So you can tap into like that trend of like discovery right now and telling like a oral history of something.
Anniversary pieces will always sell. 75 years ago this month, the electric guitar entered American popular music for the first time. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody's written about it, but Google Charlie Christian and you'll learn about it.
Yeah, Aaron, in your case, Aretha Franklin being known, some of the previous works on her being out there, lacking things, was it on you to craft the message to the consumer, explaining why this one is different, or did you have somebody that was able to craft that message for you through the publisher?
No, I mean,
let me ask the question in slightly a blunt way. If I had 3 Aretha Franklin books on my shelf and I didn't know Aaron Cohen, out comes the 4th. But I've already read 3. And I love Aretha Franklin, but I got 3 books on her. So in crafting the message, not to the publisher, I mean obviously you're able to sell that, but in crafting the message to the reader, this is why this one's different. Was it on you to craft that message, or did your publisher have somebody that did
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, if you have 3 Aretha Franklin books on your shelf, and
Again,
Okay.
let's stipulate the.
because I was gonna actually say some very bad things
Let's
about an
stipulate-
author
yeah,
of
let's
some of
stipulate-
those books.
But maybe not.
Yeah, okay.
Let's stipulate.
James knows what I'm talking about. Okay, I know what you're saying.
Let's stipulate
Yeah.
on the quality, okay?
Yeah, okay, the pitch I made for both books, as you can tell, I'm trying to hype the new one as much as the old one. Yeah, you
The
read
new
that.
one needs some pages, I think.
And it's got, yeah, once pages get in here, it's gonna be good, right? The cover looks good, but
Yeah.
it's gonna look better when it's actually wrapped around pages. Yeah, and, anyway, but to answer your question, Bill, I was about to go off on this author I don't like, but anyway, okay. We'll leave that for after, this James is laughing there. So, it's not James. Anyway, so, my point is, the pitch that I make to publish the book, even though, I mentioned that it gets different as it comes written, I have to pitch what makes this book unique as I pitch it as an idea. As the book is done, if I've done my job, even if it's taken a very different direction, it's still unique. So I have to explain what makes it unique. And it doesn't matter to me if this is the only, I know it's the only book on this album, there are none. Which, okay, that in itself makes it unique. It's the only book on this particular album, which I feel is very important. But just in general, I mean, because, let alone books about, Chicago soul, books about Aretha Franklin, whatever, there's, 1 million books that are in print right now.
Yeah.
So I have to make this case, not only why should this publisher publish it, why should someone buy it?
Yeah.
And it's the same case. This is unique for this reason.
Yeah.
And it, again, it's not comparing this book to other books on this subject. It's comparing these books, because I want people to buy both of my books, it's comparing these books to every other book that's out there.
Yeah, and is it fair to say something kind of similar applies with articles, like as a jazz magazine consumer? If all I see is a headline, Coltrane, love Coltrane, I only got so much time in the day, and there are these 10 other articles here, why am I gonna go in and read article number N on Coltrane again? And how do you get there from here?
I've always, because that's the thing I've always felt, if you're writing about music, you have to do, one of two things. You have to write about an artist who everybody knows in a way that's different than everybody else, or write about an artist that's completely unknown to everybody but you, and you have to tell the world why the world should know it. And it's always going to be that balance.
In the former case, if you're looking, say, at magazine headlines, you're kind of in the world of Twitter in a way. Because somebody's going to decide in seconds, I'm going to dive into this or not. How do you, and I'm asking partially for him by proxy there, which is,
You're looking for
I'm asking partially for him by proxy. If he's writing about history and he writes about a train, he'll have to write something more than, here's another cool article about John Coltrane. How do you get Twitterish in on the magazines and make it work?
Well, before I take up too much time, do you guys have anything to answer?
I mean, my reaction is if somebody else is going to write about it, I don't want to write about it. There's just too much else that I'm interested in writing about, and I'm filling a need. I'm trying to fill a need, and I'm trying to inform an audience about what's out there. So, given that there are limited places for people to even read about music in the first place, I want to offer a surplus of new
You're going to go on Aaron's plan B there, which you're going to do.
But even there are times when you have to write about something that everyone is writing about too. I have 2 examples, one being Chance. Chance just dropped an album, so naturally everyone was going to write about it. Everyone wrote the same review for the most part. But for us, we took a step back and I personally don't like the album, but Morgan found ways to like the album. And so she was like, what, she had this, she said that, the thing with the album is that it's too long and that it's not arranged properly. So I said, well then let's write a story about what this album could be if it was arranged the way that you think it should be arranged. So now that has made our review different than Pitchfork and everyone else's, because everyone else's review was just bashing him. So when in that case on Twitter, if everyone's bashing one thing, we don't want to come in and just add to the bashing because we already know it's not doing well. Yeah, so now it's like, how can we do something different that'll attract people to this particular thing? another example I have is, I wrote a story on, she's a DJ producer, her name is Lynn. And when I did that story, I think I did that, it was for Vice. The editors already told me that everyone was gonna be writing a review about her album, because Lynn had gained a lot of attraction. So they wanted me to try to find a way to make my profile different than everyone else's. So I sat down and I was like, well, no one's gonna write about, no one's gonna put like a Chicago spin on it like I'm able to do. So for me writing a story, my story started off with me traveling to Gary, Indiana to interview her, and I made it about fireworks. Like, Chicagoans don't go to Gary, Indiana unless you're going to get gas or fireworks. Like, so that already brought a different angle into that story than someone from Pitchfork who's flying into Gary, Indiana. All of their stories were like Michael Jackson and Steel Mill and whatever, and I'm like, no one crosses this border unless you're going to get gas or fireworks. So the story then turned into her being, like explosive and fireworks, and all of our pictures were like, we took her to a fireworks place and bought fireworks.
That's
like,
great.
So
That's
that at that point made that story different than everyone else's review. And she liked it too. So then at that point, because you've now gotten the attention of the artist, they're gonna share it. So now you've reached a whole new audience on social media. Because they retweeted and they shared it because it's different than what everything else has said, which was she grew up in Gary, Indiana. There's nothing here. Still, blah blah blah.
There were a lot of Jolene stories, and yeah, Tiffany's is like the one that I remember. Like the minute you said her, I was like fireworks immediately, and that just shows you.
That's
Yeah.
so imagine. That's amazing.
Yeah, because I'm like, I don't go to Gary, Indiana, but gas, fireworks. So
Howard,
Research there.
One way of thinking about this, it sounds like, is framing. And, the headline, the writers usually are not responsible for the headlines. So the Coltrane article, it must be up to the editor to give you a focus and a spin that's unique if you have not come up with one yourself. And especially, it would seem unlikely you would get an assignment to write about Coltrane unless you had something that was unique that you were offering at this point. But to go back to the aggregate thing also, my blog is on artsjournal.com, and I got onto that because I saw it as an aggregating site for a bunch of different art forms every day. And I thought, well, I'm not seeing that kind of arts coverage in the Times or the Washington Post or the Sun-Times or the Trib, and here's stories from all over the world, and I can place my blog post in that context, which is very useful, I think, and it's going out to some, every day, which I can't get out myself as a blog every day at that kind of numbers. So I think that kind of aggregating is useful if people are still reading these listserv sort of things, or if they're going to blogs at all, which I'm not sure about.
And newsletters is like the new thing now.
Oh yeah.
You gotta get a newsletter if you want people to read you, and a lot of newsletters do similar
Do that
aggregating thing, but a little more creative because it's the appeal that it's personal. You don't have to deal with ads for the most part. You are just writing specifically to those who want to read you and what you're reading and what
and
you
you
care about.
just email them that? You just
Yeah,
send your own email
there are a lot of services.
Are you aware of Ned Sublets?
Oh, he's wonderful. I love Ned.
But there is no way to monetize these, is there?
it is a way to monetize newsletters, but
Was Gene Lee's
Well,
the first blog?
He has other sources of revenue himself.
Ned does tours, and
Well,
his
Ned
West
does-
readership kind of
right.
drives his.
Is that what you're saying about the monetizing, that it's the ancillary activities?
Yeah, I mean, part of the appeal for newsletters for writers now is like, cool, this is like a zine essentially. This is sort of a callback to that, is you're delivering it right to the people who want to read. It's a much smaller audience, but it's much more focused in that way. But yeah, there are ways to monetize it. I mean, the reader's going to be like redoing our newsletters specifically to kind of engage on a more personal level with.
And how does that monetize?
You sell ads. You can sell ads in the body of the.
Yeah, of course.
yeah, because it's an audience, and depending on who you're using to distribute your newsletter, you have access to who your audience is, how many people are subscribed, how many women, how many men. Those same analytics can be seen in a newsletter as they can be seen on a website. So then now you package that to someone who's trying to reach your audience, and you say, like, there are party listservs, for example, party newsletters that have thousands and thousands and thousands of people on them. And then they started doing advertising in their newsletter, and I'm like, oh, why not? If you got 20,000 people subscribed to your newsletter, you can monetize that. You now have an audience. So
More than many jazz bands. What?
Is that mailing list an opt-in?
most of it, sometimes it's opt-in, but sometimes, like with us, when we have events, we use this site called Eventbrite, where you collect email addresses, or if we're out somewhere, we ask people to subscribe to our newsletter. But when we do events, we take those emails and we add them to the newsletter. And you can opt out. There's always an option where if you don't want to get this newsletter anymore, you can just cancel it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
unsubscribe.
yeah. So you can opt in, or if you come to an event, I imagine you will want to be on our newsletter, so we add you to it.
I'm gonna suggest that we end this now. Because the
Thank
next
you all very
panel,
much for coming, by the way, everybody.
that
Thank
the
you.
next panel is supposed to start in 10 minutes. It might be a chance for people to get up and stretch a little bit and get ready for the next panelists to come up here and get ready. Thank you very much to our panelists. Leor, Tiffany, Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for being here and being engaged.